Oh man, I love that song. That's one of my top 10 songs on my playlist on my phone I listen to all the time. And there's something about being a maverick, something about thinking outside the box, something about being a creative for me, that song is an anthem for me. I mean, even in high school or college, if everyone was doing it, that was not a temptation for me. That was a reason for me to do something different. And there's something about leaders, there's something about innovators, that we don't just follow the trends. We look at the patterns, we say, well, why not something else? Or what if something else? Great leaders don't interview the sheep to determine their values and their convictions. Leaders lead. Leaders stand up for what they believe. And yet, there's a downside to that song, isn't there? Some of the biggest troubles I've gotten into, some of the biggest mistakes I've made is because that maverick attitude of, I don't need to follow anybody, I can do it my own way, led to falling in a ditch, led to being unteachable in my career, led to conflict between individuals, on a team or in a family, and it led to chaos because I wandered off and did my own thing. I don't need God's opinion. I don't need other people's opinion. So that same anthem that resonates with me on one side is also the same anthem that explains a lot of the trouble I've gotten into as well. In the series Flock Watchers, we've been looking at the story of a man named John Patchell. John has been wandering like a sheep that goes astray. He has longed for a shepherd, someone who could help him. We left off last week where he had gotten to a place that in his marriage things had gotten pretty dry. And his maverick attitude of me first, it's all about me, had led to a moment where they're about to get divorced. We're going to pick up his story today as someone comes into his life, a fellow leader, a fellow CEO, a man who's a follower of Christ, who begins to shepherd him in business. And later begins to shepherd him in his heart toward finding out, why do I keep doing the same dumb things over and over again? Let's watch.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had this guy that had come in and out of my life that really intrigued me. He was a guy that I thought he was different. He had something about him that I wasn't familiar with. He had like this peace about him. This is kind of like this wisdom. He kind of and he had approached me several times and said, "How you doing?" And I'd say, "Oh." And I could tell he could see into me. And I could tell he didn't want just the answer of fine. And so I would just, I don't know why, I would give him just enough. I'd say, I'm a mess. And he'd say, let's go out to lunch. And so we went out to lunch once or twice. And
I started hanging out with John because I always kind of wanted to be a friend with him. And I started hanging out with John, and I started mentoring him around business. We didn't have any formal discipleship, but we have probably met, I don't know how many times, 50 or 100 times, one-on-one, most of them with a cigar, and most of them with a glass of wine, covering a litany of personal subjects and challenging each other, or at least just talking about it and saying, well, golly, what'd you do then? What do you think I should do? And just back and forth.
When he said, hey, would you like to go through the Bible and find out more about Jesus? I said yes, and then he says, well, let me think about it and pray about it. And I thought, what do you mean, Terry? Why think about it and pray about it? I thought you just asked me, and I didn't understand what he was talking about at all when he said I need to think about it and pray about it.
I just couldn't get any input from the Lord that any sense I was supposed to do it.
For some reason, he thought that John and I would be a good pair. So Terry called me and asked me if I would just visit with John. So I called John and we got together. I
was on my trip to the Middle East, and I had to meet like 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday in order to get out. And hey, can you meet me at 6 and all this? And then he said, yeah, let's meet, and we'll see if we both want to move forward. And I thought, wow, what is this, like an audition or what is this like? I didn't understand the whole thing and what was getting ready to take place. I was a little bit fearful because I knew what I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be a Bible beater, or I had all these images of of what this could look like that really created, frankly, some fear in me. He didn't tell me what kind of car or even what he looked like. We just told what time we were going to meet. And so I see this minivan pull up, and this my judgmental mind thought, oh no, I'm not going to have anything in common with this guy. And then this older gentleman gets out. He kind of shuffling. He's looking down. He's shuffling across the parking lot. And for some reason, I absolutely knew it was going to be the guy that I'm meeting with. And I thought, I absolutely know that we're not going to have anything in common. And a few minutes later, we're sitting down in the coffee shop, and I am just vomiting my life story. And I was weeping uncontrollably, just letting him know everything.
It was seeing a man in the process of being broken. He's kind of ashamed of himself for crying in there, but he was just in a place of pretty deep pain at that point in his life.
And then he proceeds to tell me, I'm really in a good place now. And I thought, what do you mean I'm in a good place? And he said, no, you're in a good place. And I didn't really know what he meant until later when I understood that I knew I needed something bigger than myself.
And then he finally met with him, and come to find out it was a perfect fit, just an absolute perfect fit.
And I knew this wasn't an overnight thing. We had, if we did connect, that it was going to be a long-term situation. Most of the things that John was in, I had been in. So, I knew the pain of that stuff.
In our series Flock Watchers, we've been taking a journey of leadership principles that can be used by parents, can be used by employers, community leaders. If you influence anyone, we have learned the story of Ted McBride, the CEO of General Technologies, and that in leading a successful company, he said he learned it way back at the University of Texas from Jack Newman, his mentor, who taught him in a sheep herd the principles of management he used to lead his business. We pick up the story today as Jack finds himself bringing Ted to his ranch again. And there at the ranch, he shows up and has one of the largest rams in the back of his truck that Ted had ever seen before. He says, hey, do you mind putting this guy in the pen? Can you put this guy in the pen while I go grab some tools? What are we going to do today? You'll see. We tried to lead this guy to the pen. He couldn't decide who was leading who, if you know what I mean. He feels like maybe he didn't lead the ram to the pen, the ram led him. He got him into the pen, and next thing you know, Jack shows up. Jack has in his hand a big, long pliers, silver, cold steel with a tag on it, with a number and the emblem of his ranch. Well, what are we going to do with that? It's time for your next lesson, he smirked. Thanks for the warning. Wiped off the wool and the dirt. What's that for? Well, we got to tag the sheep and make the sheep know he belongs. He's part of a herd. He's part of something bigger. He's part of a flock. How do you tag it? Well, you take this pliers up to his ear. You squeeze hard, and it pushes a yellow tag into his ear. Wasn't that going to hurt? Well, sure. The ear tissue is some of the most tender tissue. But if you're a shepherd, you've got to tag the sheep. He put the pliers in my hand, the cold weight. I remember thinking how angry and how stupid I thought sheep were, and for the first time I felt some compassion toward the sheep. If I was to be a shepherd, I had to tag the sheep. I got him down the pen, and I tried to hold him close and nice and tight. I grabbed the pliers and went up to his ear, and I got up the courage, and I squeezed hard, and I pushed into him, and he pulled away. I quickly let go of the pliers so I didn't rip the ear tissue, and I felt horrible. Just horrible. It also surprised me that the sheep didn't make any noise. Jack turned to me and says, hey, let's head into the kitchen and grab a Coke. Finally broke the silence. I feel terrible. Jack turned to me and said, It hurt you too, didn't it? Yeah, I didn't want to do it. He says, as you move into management, as you become a parent, as you move into any area of leadership, part of the role of a shepherd is to place a mark on your flock. Placing a mark on your flock is letting them know where the values are, where the standards are, where the boundaries are. And part of being a shepherd is identifying with your sheep and letting your sheep know when they've crossed the line. That means there's going to be times that you're going to have to care for them enough that you're going to have to inflict pain on them. Part of leadership is performance evaluations, poor performance evaluations at times, truth talking, corralling people back to the standards and to the direction they need to go. And yet there are some leaders who do that, and they have an anger or a hatred or a presumption toward their employees. But the good shepherd is one who identifies with the sheep, cares for them, hurts with them, says things because they need to be said, but because also they know it's the loving thing and the best thing to allow the sheep to know it's part of something bigger. I've seen some sheep in my day, and sheep can be some stupid animals. I one time, Jack said, saw a sheep, 40-pound sheep, trying to pound his way through a 6-inch hole. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But they can also be very shrewd. Ted said, well, why didn't it make any noise? He says, well, one of the things sheep understand is that the only way they can stay safe when coyotes come, they don't have a lot of options, is if they stay close to the herd. The weakest link, the one that makes noise, is the one that gets eaten first. So sheep have a tendency, even when you mark them or tag them, to not make any noise. He says, Ted, let me tell you what you're going to do when you end up, and he outlines this in his book, The Way of the Shepherd. He says, you've learned that everyone needs a shepherd, someone to lead them and guide them. As we saw with the story on the screen, we need folks to help us and guide us and mentor us who are a little farther along than we are spiritually, financially, developmentally in life. We also need to understand our sheep, that they have individual strengths, individual weaknesses, individual goals. And we as a shepherd get to know them and put them in a place in our organization that can bring the very best out of them as we scan the landscape and understand how to tie their strengths to the needs of the organization. He said, but the thing of a shepherd is a shepherd puts a mark on every person in their organization, in their family. What does it mean to be a Hovend? What does it mean to be in my division? What does it mean to be part of our company? What are the values that emulate from us? There's a sense of belonging you have, of knowing you're part of something greater. And that organization, you believe in that. You believe, your leaders believe in you, and the values that drive you are important and they're valued. That tag, that mark of leadership that day that he was sharing with Ted, he said, you know, you're about to have 9 direct reports. Let's head over to the truck and I'll head back. You're going to have 9 direct reports in your first job here as your way up to eventually becoming the CEO. He said, those 9 reports are going to want to know that they belong somewhere, that someone cares about them. They know where the boundaries are, what matters, and what the values are, and how you make decisions. And part of what you put when you mark, when you catch somebody who's outside of the boundary markers and you lead them back in place, is you're putting the mark of leadership upon them. He said, well, Ted, what's the greatest leader you know? Well, probably my dad, but he's not a business leader. He's just a school teacher. He said, leadership occurs everywhere. It's in the boardroom. It's in the kitchen. It's on the soccer field. What made your dad such a great leader? He said, I guess my dad acted the same way no matter where he was. And he always seemed to be on the right side of an issue. Well, why is that? Well, he was consistent. My dad used to say that you could sell your integrity for a nickel, but all the money in the world wouldn't buy it back. He said that's authentic, consistent leadership. Your father was modeling the very values that he owned. He said, how about, you ever seen somebody who's a bad leader? He said, oh yeah. I remember one time a buddy of mine at church, we went fishing together, fly fishing. And I remember as we went fly fishing, his dad was the deacon of the church, and I always thought of him as the deacon of the church. Well, I must be super spiritual. When we got out fishing, he was telling very off-color jokes and saying very inappropriate things. And I had a lot of respect for him that day because he acted one way in this environment and a different way in that environment. To which Jack said, well, that's exactly right. What makes a great leader, what makes a great shepherd is someone who's consistent and authentic. They don't pretend to be one thing in this environment and another thing in this environment. They're constantly modeling the values. And that's the principle we want to look at from the Bible today is this, is that a shepherd is someone who models the values. You see, when you as a mom or dad, you as a leader, when you model the values, you prove you can be trusted. It's one thing to talk about them, it's something to model them. When you model the values, you prove you can be trusted. And the flock values what you model and trusts you to lead. When you model the values, you prove you can be trusted. And the flock, those you're influencing, they value the very models that you're showing, and they trust you to lead because of your authenticity and your consistency. I read a parenting book 2 years ago that really challenged me, especially as you're parenting teenagers. It said, as you're interacting with your kids and trying to help them succeed in the skills that you would like them to have spiritually and financially and otherwise, begin with this question. Turn to your son or daughter and say, do mom and dad, do we have something you'd want? So before you go give a speech, you may be giving a speech and trying to offer something that your kids don't even want. I thought, what a challenge. Before I give you all this direction on how to live life, am I even living something that you even want? I was happy to report that I had the guts to say it to my son as we were talking about some things in the future and some plans we were making. I said, now, would you say that mom and dad, do we have something you want? The way we're living our life, the consistency of our life. Am I modeling something you think is valuable? He said, yeah. And I dared to say the next question. What percentage of what we have would you want? He said, probably 80%. I'll take it! 80%! Oh my goodness, this is a red letter day. Write that down. To me, that was very affirming. But I also thought, what's that 20%? Now, for some of us, we wouldn't want to ask that question, would we? But I think we need to ask that question of ourselves and get to the place that we can ask that question to our teenagers. Because as a leader, as a shepherd, if we're not modeling the values, we're not proving we can be trusted. And therefore, the flock doesn't value what we're modeling and trusting us to lead. So that's why the issue of shepherding challenges us. And we looked at the CEO from General Technologies. Now I want to look at a CEO from Cush. His name's Jethro. Moses ran into him when he was 40 years old. Now keep in mind, Moses has been trained for 40 years under the best leadership training in the world through Egypt. He's been trained for 40 years, and yet he didn't understand or learn how to handle his anger. He found himself in a moment of temptation, losing his temper, killing a man, and running off for fear. He's feeling fear. He's feeling rejection. He's now gone from being a commander in an aristocratic environment in Egypt to wandering around in the desert by himself. And here a man shepherds him, much like we saw with the story of John. Comes alongside him, his name's Jethro, teaches him a new business, the business of shepherding. He teaches him how to make a living. He's very successful at it. He teaches him how to be a father. He teaches him how to run a family. He teaches him how to model the values and how to create ownership and morale, how to create a family and a company that values and works hard even when they're not being supervised. 40 years he's mentored, Moses is, by Jethro. 40 years Jethro models what it looks like to love, to care, to be concerned, to pour into the lives of those that you're with, that you care about, that you're leading. Moses is now 80. 80. When a burning bush appears to him. 80! And God tells him to go and face his greatest fear and go back to his greatest place of rejection. And he's scared. He makes a bunch of excuses. He ends up going back into Egypt. He confronts his greatest fears with the Pharaoh. There's been 10 plagues, each aimed at one of the Egyptian gods to show that God is greater and real, unlike the other gods who can't control the sea, and they can't control the boils, and they can't control the frogs. Then the Pharaoh chases him down after the Passover, and they head out to the Red Sea, and God delivers them through the Red Sea and comes crushing down on the folks trying to kill him. And now Moses has the 10 Commandments. Now he has the law of God. And now he's trying to lead somewhere between 500,000 and 2 million people, depending on estimates. And now, suddenly, his shepherding skills seem very important. How do you take a large flock and lead them and guide them and teach them a whole new way of life? And yet, in his good intention to be a good leader, even after 40 years of modeling by his father-in-law, he ends up marrying Jethro's daughter Zipporah, he is swamped. He is burnt out. And so the first principle of flock watching we find comes from Jethro. Jethro shows up and says, you've got to model as a leader. You've got to model. You build trust for your kids. You build trust with your employees. You build trust with your colleagues by modeling authenticity, integrity, and compassion. So Moses is exhausted. Here's what happens. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, a shepherd, heard of all that God had done for Moses. The first thing I want you to notice is that Jethro, though he's not with them anymore, he's been keeping up on them. He's heard what's going on. He's heard about the stories. Part of being a shepherd is that we care. We want to know what's going on in the lives of those we lead. They're more than just a cog in a wheel. They're people, and we care about their story. He heard about what God had done for Moses and Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses. So he initiates these conversations. He comes and says, hey, I heard what's going on. I want to check in on you. Hey, I was just thinking of you. He initiates. Compassion. What's going on? It's got to be a huge task. Where he was encamped in the mountain of God. As the story continues, next slide, what we find is that they begin to talk to one another. The research shows that most men don't even have one friend who we talk about more than just the weather or the Reds game. In fact, as we've done our men's study for the last 3 years, we've found that to be true. That the 60 to 90 guys who've gone through our men's study would say, I've never had, not only a shepherd, I've never had a friend. I mean, somebody I could really sort of share what's going on, my fears, my struggles, my challenges. And I don't want it to be like a kumbaya moment, but I mean real guy talk about real issues. But notice what Jethro and Moses have. He said to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons with her. In other words, Moses trusted this guy. Because he just went down and thought he was going to get killed by the Pharaoh, and he entrusted his father-in-law, this mentor, this shepherd, to protect his wife and kids during that time. So there's so much trust that the most important, critical, valuable things in his life have been entrusted to this man because of what he modeled for him for 40 years. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. Again, I'm not encouraging you to kiss anybody, but in that culture, that would be a very common greeting. That would be the equivalent of shaking hands or even a hug in our culture. And notice they asked about each other, about their well-being. How are you doing, really? Really? And they went into the tent to talk together. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh. He shared his high points and to the Egyptians and for Israel's sake. But he also shared his low points, all the hardship that had come upon him on the way, how the Lord had delivered them. Oh my goodness! And Jethro rejoiced with all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he delivered out of the hands. Shepherds ask about our highs and our lows. They check in with us. Hey, last time we were together, you said you're really struggling with this health issue. I want you to let you know I was thinking about that. How's that affecting you? Hey, you really said this was an issue, an obstacle. We did some things to try and get that obstacle out of your way. Is that obstacle gone? We care about the hardships. We want the very best out of those that we're influencing and working with. We're checking in because we really care. We're celebrating, rejoicing with those who rejoice. We're not so worried that we have to take credit from other people. We can truly rejoice when other people get credit. We can share it because we're a team. We're a flock. We have a value of rejoicing with one another. We are modeling the values of caring and concern for one another. That's what it is to be a shepherd. We saw this terrible movie when Beth and I were first married, The Story of Us, with Michelle Pfeiffer and Bruce Willis. I mean, some people liked it, but it just wasn't great. But there's one thing that we did like is that the family got together, and the family always asked the question, what's your high and your low? So we picked that up before we had kids, and so when we have family dinners, sometimes it's once a week, sometimes it's a few times a week, we say, hey, what's your high and your low? And that's gone on for 18 years. It's interesting that that's exactly what Jethro and Moses are doing. And, you know, most people, when they ask you how you're doing, you say fine because you don't have time and they don't really care and you know they don't care, and you don't have time because you don't really want them to care because you don't really care that they know what's going on with you. But we need people in our life that we can talk about the highs and the lows. I've got a book called The 1001 Great Questions. So we'll go out with my teenagers and their friends, and nobody knows how to talk about real stuff anymore. So I'll often say, give me a number between 1 and 1001. 227. I'll flip this book open to 222, and I'll ask a question. You know, what's your favorite vacation? What scares you the most? And I'm amazed that these teenagers want to talk because several of them, my son actually is more like, oh, do we have to? But his buddies are like, hey, can you pull out the book? We'll be on our way to go skiing, or we'll be on our way to hang out together, play volleyball together. And I'm amazed that people hunger and long for real conversations about real life. In fact, we had Marcus Gardner, our CEO here, was sharing that one of the things he does with his kids to demonstrate this is he says, is there anything you want Dad to do more of? Is there anything you want Dad to do less of? And is there any question that you want me to answer? And nothing's off limits. That's a regular dose of questions he uses to shepherd his kids. But we've got to model these things. The second thing Jethro does is that Jethro begins to challenge him. I mean, it's a pretty big challenge, in fact. He sets high standards. He notices, he follows his son-in-law for a day of work, and he finds that, wow, his son-in-law is pretty burnt out. Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. For I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behave proudly, he was above them." And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. Moses came in with all the elders to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before the Lord. One of the things that leaders do is that we set high standards of performance. And Moses comes in and hears from Jethro. Jethro says, "Moses, you're serving the God of all gods, the one who just proved that he controls the things that the Egyptians said they were in control of. If you are serving the Most High God, why would you not have the most high standard of performance?" Oftentimes in every organization, the tendency is to go toward mediocre. And in my industry, it's the worst. I used to get so frustrated in church because it always seemed good enough for church work. Somehow it was inappropriate to tell somebody they ought to learn how to play better or sing better or certainly preach better. People weren't open to feedback. It seemed like that was somehow ungodly in some way. And yet we believe that excellence honors God and inspires people. And we model that. In fact, on Fridays, my staff will come in and see me delivering my messages here to an empty room every Friday. I've done for the last 20 years. So we challenge them to say, "I'm not sure you own that song. I'm not sure that you allowed that song to permeate you. I'm not sure that video was really put together at the level of excellence. It's not like we're sitting in some high place looking at and just critiquing. We too are modeling. We too are open to critique. We open to people speaking into our life." We just had a staff meeting last week, and we asked if everybody would be open to putting our ministries on the board and all of us critiquing ways in which we could be better, encouraging as well. Everybody's like, "I'm not sure we're ready for that." So we said, "We'll go first." So Marcus and I said, "Why don't you critique us?" And quite frankly, they weren't critical enough. So we said, "Well, let me tell you some things we think we're bad at." And we began to put those up on the board. We said, now, we want that kind of feedback. We want to have high standards of how we treat people, how we perform, what it is we're trying to do and accomplish. Because we believe that the message of the Bible is the most important thing in the universe, and it needs to be communicated passionately and creatively. And we're not just doing babysitting with our children's ministry. We're anchoring into them a value system which they will never recover from in a good way, we hope. So we set the standards high. The third thing Jethro does is that he says, "Moses, you've got to relentlessly communicate the values and the mission." So it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood before Moses from morning till evening. He's working 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you're doing? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand before you from morning till evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Well, because the people come to me to inquire of God." I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? What we're doing is so important, but you're wearing yourself out. Is there another way? I mean, this is the guy who just brought the 10 Commandments down from heaven. This is the guy who just crossed the Red Sea. His father-in-law is critiquing him on his day at the office. How would you respond to Jethro? Why don't you go back to Midian? That's what I want you to do. I just talked to God. Look, my face is even glowing. Look at that. You're giving me advice. It's amazing in fact, God will later in the book of Numbers say the reason he did such amazing things with Moses is because Moses was the most humble man on earth. He was open to feedback from God and from others. Jethro says there is a way. You need to stop doing it yourself. You need to relentlessly communicate your values to other people who can pass that on so it's not all about you. Next verse, here's how he says it. He says, when they have a difficulty, Moses is still explaining, they came to me, and I judge between one another. And I, as the I again, make known the statutes of God and his laws. Well, it's good to have values, good to have standards. But Moses' father-in-law said, "Hey, this thing you do, it's not good." But you got to be like, "Oh, thank you, father-in-law." But you and these people who are with you will surely wear you out. This is too big. You're not shepherding in the best possible way. For this thing is too much for you alone. You're not able to perform it by yourself. Now notice, here's a guy who cares. I'm worried about you, buddy. It's a great thing you got going on, incredible mission you have going on, but I'm worried that if you keep at the pace you're going at, you think you're running a sprint, you're running a marathon, you're not going to make it. So let me encourage you with this. Both you and these people will surely wear you out. I'll jump down. Listen now to my voice. Listen, buddy. I've been with you. You know my heart for you. I'll give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for your people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws. Teach the people. Show them the way in which they must walk and the work they must do. Instead of it always be about you, why don't you teach other people, relentlessly communicate to them the values and the statutes, so everyone knows, so there can be more delegation, so there can be intentional apprenticeship going on, so there's more than just you who are communicating the values. And isn't that what we all want in organization? We don't always come back and say, hey, what does Chad think, or what does the elders think, or what does the exec board think? We want our values to be so permeated in staff and volunteers. We're relentlessly communicating those things so everyone knows, which means leaders are teachers. We're teaching the statutes and the principles and the values. We model it and we teach it. We teach it and we model it. Our kids see it in us. They see us make mistakes, and we say, hey, I didn't live consistent with the standard I talk about. And they see me model forgiveness. They see me model the idea that, oh, Dad messed up again. I want to apologize. I didn't talk very respectfully. I tell you to talk respectfully, but I wasn't very respectful. Relentlessly, because vision leaks, doesn't it? It's exhausting. You feel like, oh, haven't we covered this again? Every conversation, every opportunity, we're relentlessly communicating the values. And what we're doing is tagging our organization. When you relentlessly communicate the values, you're constantly saying, this is what it means to be part of our flock. We value respect. We value excellence. We don't go for perfectionism. That's impossible. But excellence. Not sloppiness. No. And we're constantly saying, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like to have the kind of values lived out in an organization. Well, then he gives a very specific thing. He says, now, Moses, what you have to do is you have to tell people their job, define the cause, give them boundaries, and lead them into that. As it says, next slide. Define the cause for your people and tell them where they fit in. Moreover, you shall select from the people able men. So you're going to find the people in the organization that you feel like have discernment, that they're modeling this, that they're trusted, and you're going to create what's called under-shepherds. You're the shepherd, but you're going to create under-shepherds. You're going to invest in them as a shepherd and have them and teach them, and they're going to invest and teach others. They're going to be people who fear God, men of truth that people respect. They hate covetousness. They can't be bribed. And you're going to place them over the people to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. And it will be that every great matter will come up to you. You're like the Supreme Court. But every small matter, they themselves shall judge. And look at this management. Look at this system being put in place. Here's Moses, a guy who hears from God, but he's got to get advice from his Midian father-in-law, a trusted friend, who loved him enough to say, you're going to kill yourself if you keep operating the way you are. Isn't that true in every organization? I know for me, sometimes I'm so busy because Sunday comes every 7 days. Did you know that? Every 7 days. And now we've added Saturday services. It's like we're doing some every 6 days. Now, the good news is the pastors, I only work 2 days a week, right? So it's wonderful. I know it's a luxury you don't have. But every 7 days, and so creating new systems, unlearning things that worked, relearning new things that work. And sometimes you're so busy being in it, you're so busy working in it, you don't work on it. So you need somebody to challenge you to say, wow, you're so busy in it, and it's not that you're not trying hard, it's not the wheels aren't spinning. You've got to pause, step back, have a Jethro voice in your life, someone who loves you enough to say, you're so working in it, you need to work on it. You need to define the cause again and remind people that what they're doing matters. You need to tell people where you're in charge of the 1,000 and you're in charge of the 100. Sounds like there's some disagreement here and who's in charge of this 50, and you're clarifying those boundaries and those roles. Because as a shepherd, you're creating structure, and structure too honors God and leads people in healthy ways. Define the cause for your people and tell them where they fit in. He says it will be easier for you. Now, it doesn't feel easier when you do this, does it? It's like, I don't even have time to do what I'm doing, let alone something else. I know. But if you step back and work on it, it will eventually be easier for you. You have a better system. For they, the people you train, the people you're shepherding, the people you're investing in, they will help bear the burden with you. You're not doing this alone. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure. You can run this marathon. And all the people will also go to their place in peace. There won't be so much conflict. I never get to talk to Moses. Oh, the lines are so long. So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. Now just pause and hear that for a moment. Your father-in-law shows up at your office, tells you the things you're doing wrong. How many weeks, months, or years is it going to take for you to heed his voice, even if he's right? I'm going to prove he's wrong. I'm going to work really hard for the next month to prove I don't need my father-in-law's advice. It takes an incredible humility. And that's why the main message of the Bible allows for that. The main message of the Bible comes and humbles us. And it says that we have hearts that have a tendency to lie to ourselves about what's true. And we need to be forgiven for that. And so in that humility, we're very open to feedback. We're very open to being wrong. We're very open to other people speaking into our life, even folks who aren't experts in our arena. Doesn't mean they're always right, but we're open to feedback. And that openness allows us to grow because we don't have a lid on ourselves. A lid of self-imposed, I'm not open to new information, or I'm not open to change. So my encouragement to you is this: start flock watching. Start flock watching. What does it look like for you to start flock watching today? To help the sheep identify with you, we looked at 4 things. I want you to pick one. I want to invite the band to come up as we do this. Maybe for you today, like that conversation I had with my kids, before you have a conversation with your staff, before you have a conversation with somebody you influence, you need to start with number 1. I have got to model this better. Oh, maybe it's some time of journaling, some time of prayer, where you say, I say this is important, but I don't live it out like it's important. And there's some changes you need to make to be a better shepherd and leader. For some of us, we said, I covered that 3 years ago. But a lot of the confusion in our organization is because we have communicated, but not relentlessly communicated. And not done it in a way that's affirming, a way that's valuing, a way that makes people know that what they do matters and know where they're communicating. Third, for some of us, just in the run of things, the standards begin to drop. Standards of customer service, standards of performance, standards of behavior in a family. We just get so busy with other things, we just I just don't have time to talk about that. And maybe the challenge for you today is to reset that standard of excellence for yourself and for others. Or maybe you just got some folks who just need to know that they matter, for you to define the cause of where you're headed and where you're going. But Ted McBride stepped back into that pen that day. All by himself, he sat with that sheep and he said out loud, I'm really sorry. And he said to himself, look at me, I'm talking to a sheep. He said, but I want you to know that you are part of an incredible ranch. You're incredible. You're part of something bigger and someone that I've grown to respect. And years later, when he led one of the most successful companies, with one of the most high, not only success rate as a company, but folks in the company who said they loved working there. He said what he learned that day is that as a leader, we're not knights, we're not warriors up on our horses looking down on other people giving orders. We're shepherds in and amongst the sheep, sharing our heart with them, sharing our struggles with them, identifying with them, and leading them to greater places. We live in a world today that demonizes masculinity. It is confused about masculinity. But what you see in the Bible is a clear, tender warrior shepherd. The measure of a man is someone who knows how to model these things and admit when they don't. Let's listen together. You know, one of the things I love about the Bible is the Bible doesn't give us a cookbook or a cosmic equation. It comes to us in a person. Jesus came as the person of God and said, I want to model this for you. And if you're not sure about the Bible or God or this whole thing, I would encourage you to read one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And even if you don't believe it, I read lots of stuff I don't believe. Read it and just ask yourself, does Jesus have something I want? Look at how he interacts. Look at how he talks. Look at how he cares. Look how concerned he is. what you're going to find is your spiritual interest is going to go up. Not because you believe it anymore, because you're like, wow, why would I not want that? So thanks for being here. We're going to continue our series, Flock Watchers, next week. If you're new to Horizon, we'd love to put a name with a face. Third door on your left is the hearth room. If you came prepared to give, there's some offering boxes on the way out. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.